The townsfolk said the widow, Elena Ward, lived too far out on the broken Nevada plains, where the wind howled like something wounded and the sky stretched so wide it could swallow a person whole. But Elena had made that lonely ranch her fortress, long before she ever met the man people would later call the giant Apache. His real name was Tassay, quiet, solemn, and tall enough that he looked carved from the very sandstone cliffs surrounding her land. She first found him leaning against her corral fence one early summer dusk, bleeding from a bullet wound that looked freshly carved, yet his face showed no pain, only a strange calmness, as if he'd survived far worse in his time. Elena, widowed 5 years earlier and carrying the weight of loss that had hardened her eyes, didn't ask questions. She simply opened her door and helped him inside, the same way she would have helped her late husband had fate spared him. What she didn't know was that Tassay had come to her land for a reason. He claimed he had followed a whisper in the wind, something that led him to this ranch, and the woman who stood on its porch like a figure destiny refused to break. Over the weeks that followed, as he healed, Tassay worked in silence, mending her fences, repairing her barn roof, calming the horses that no other man in town could handle. He never demanded pay, nor did he ask for shelter. He simply stayed, watching the land as if he could sense dangers that Elena could not. At night, he would sit on the ridge above the ranch house, a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky, holding a carved wooden piece shaped like a hawk, something he said belonged to his family long gone. Elena, despite her grief-worn heart, came to rely on him, not for comfort, but for strength she had forgotten she still had. And then trouble came. The kind that rides in dust clouds, a band of land thieves, led by a man named Coulter Briggs, who wanted Elena's water rights and believed a widow living alone would be easy to break. They fired warning shots, chased off cattle, and left messages carved into her fence posts. Elena refused to leave the ranch her husband had died building, but she also knew she couldn't fight a gang of 7 armed men alone. Tassay, however, didn't hesitate. "Your land is under my watch," he told her in his low, thunder-like voice. "While I live, nothing will cross your gate," and for a time those words held true. He guarded the ranch like a living legend, chasing off intruders with nothing but his height, his steady stare, and his fearlessness. But one night, under a sky that glowed red from a distant wildfire, Coulter and his men launched a full attack, torches thrown, rifles raised. Tassay met them head-on, fighting with the fury of a storm, but even giants bleed. By dawn, the attackers fled into the hills, but Tassay collapsed near the old cottonwood tree, his blood soaking the roots. Elena held him as he drew his final breaths, her tears painting dark streaks across his cheeks. Yet before his eyes dimmed, he whispered something chilling and gentle all at once. "The land remembers." "And so do I. My watch is not done." He died in her arms, and the wind that swept over the ranch that morning felt colder than any winter storm. She buried him at the ridge where he used to sit, marked the grave with the hawk carving he once carried, and believed, with crushing sorrow, that her ranch was now undefended. But Elena was wrong, very wrong. Because the first night after his burial, the horses began to stir restlessly, the wind shifted strange, and on the ridge above the house, a tall shadow stood exactly where he used to sit, watching, unmoving, as if death had done nothing at all. Elena tried to convince herself the figure on the ridge was just a trick of the fading dusk, a branch swaying, her own grief twisting into shapes she longed to see. Yet every night afterward the same silhouette appeared, broad-shouldered, still as stone, and positioned exactly where Tassay once kept his silent watch. The townsfolk whispered that Elena had lost her mind to loneliness, but they also whispered another rumor, one that crawled through saloons and trading posts like wildfire. Every time Coulter Briggs tried to return to the widow's land, something stopped him. One man claimed a giant shadow grabbed his horse by the reins, another swore he felt a cold hand on his shoulder though no one was there. Coulter himself bragged that he feared nothing, but even he never rode near the ridge again, not after he woke one morning with deep markings carved into his saddle, the same hawk symbol that lay on Tassay's grave. Elena, shaken but strangely comforted, began to realize that the giant had kept his final promise. She didn't see him clearly, only his outline against the sky, glowing faintly whenever the moon slipped, free from the clouds. But she felt his presence in the shifting winds, in the horses settling at night, and in the unseen footsteps that occasionally echoed across her porch boards. Still, peace is not a gift the frontier keeps for long. Months after Tasse's death, Coulter Briggs returned with dynamite, determined to claim her land once and for all. Elena stood alone at her fence, rifle shaking in her hands, waiting for the gang's final blow. Yet the moment they stepped across the property line, the world itself seemed to change. The wind roared like a beast awakened, swirling dust into a wall that blinded Coulter's men. Horses bucked violently, refusing to move forward. From the ridge came a single thunderous sound, not quite a voice, not quite the wind, something between a warning and a war cry. And then, through the dust storm's heart, a figure emerged, towering, unmistakable, glowing faintly blue at the edges as though lit by the moon itself. Elena gasped, tears spilling as she realized what she was seeing. Tasse. Not flesh, not quite spirit, but something bound to the land he'd sworn to protect. Coulter's men broke instantly, fleeing in every direction, screaming that the dead had risen. But Coulter, too stubborn or too foolish to understand fear, raised his rifle and fired point blank at the giant's chest. The bullet passed through harmlessly, dissolving like mist. Tasse stepped forward, towering above him, and for the first time since his death, Elena heard his voice. Not through ears, but through the land itself. Your harm ends here. What happened next no one could ever fully explain. Some said the ground trembled. Others said Coulter saw something behind Tasse, an entire host of ancestors, or the spirit of the land itself. Whatever it was, Coulter dropped his weapon, collapsed, and crawled away sobbing until he disappeared into the desert wastes, never to be seen again. When the dust finally settled, Tasse looked at Elena for a long, silent moment, his expression filled with something deeper than the living could understand. Then, slowly, he turned back toward the ridge, walked to the place of his grave, and faded with the first light of morning as though the dawn itself had claimed him. From that day forward, Elena never saw him clearly again, but she never felt alone. The ranch thrived, untouched by thieves or drought. Travelers swore they saw a tall figure on the ridge at night, and whenever danger approached, strangers on horseback, coyotes too close to the herd, or storms that could flatten a barn, something always intervened. Elena lived the rest of her days knowing the truth that others feared to believe. Some promises are stronger than death, and the giant Apache who guarded her land was one of them. As years passed, storytellers turned it into a legend, children whispered it around fires, and the ridge remained sacred. But Elena, until her final breath, knew it not as a legend, only as the loyalty of a protector who never left her side. And if you listen closely, some say, you can still hear footsteps on the ridge when danger approaches, still keeping watch over the widow's ranch, just as he vowed. If stories like this give you chills, heart, and hope, then hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring more powerful tales to life.